Hello, today's video we're going to be focused down on Marxism, and this is for the AQA module Beliefs in Society for 2015. Within today's video we're going to have the following objectives which we're hopefully going to achieve, which is to discuss and understand the Marxist view on religion, to evaluate Marxism, and to find examples that match the views of Marxism. Now, according to Marxists, in all nonconformist societies, a ruling class own the means of production and from their wealth derive power, which allows them to control the superstructure of society. Now, when we're talking about the superstructure of the society, this is a non-economic part of society, such as education, the state, the mass media, religion, and beliefs, attitudes, and values. So the ruling class has been able to control this, which means that it's going to have a further impact on the individual in the society. Now, from this point of view, religion is used to promote the interests of the ruling class by being used to support ruling class ideology. Now, ruling class ideology keeps the ruling class in power by discouraging subject classes from realizing that they are being exploited and then trying to overthrow ruling class power. So this is really reiterating and confirming that religion is a conservative force. That in fact that the use of religion is to dominate as well as oppress the proletariat, to ensure that they do not try to create a revolution, because as it is, the best interest for society is by having the bourgeoisie in power. Without that, possibly society would not function well. Now, it is the bourgeoisie that believes society would not function well without their dominant ideology being present within that community. Now, Marx famously described religion as the opium of the masses. Now, the reason being why he saw it as this is the fact of the matter of that he saw religion being like a drug that you take to numb that pain. Now, religion numbs that pain that the proletariat feel when they are being oppressed by religious ideology that the dominant bourgeoisie have created and manipulated to reinforce the structure that is in place within society. So therefore, really ensuring that there is no revolution, that the proletariat stay as the proletariat, and they do not try to break away from their already pre-designed roles by the bourgeoisie. Now, there are several ways in which the religion is used as that opium of the masses. Now, we're going to go through a couple examples here, one of which is it promises a paradise of eternal bliss in life after death, by making life bearable by giving people something to look forward to. So, yes, at the minute you might be suffering. However, because you've been loyal, because you've been following the scripture, you have got this eternal glory waiting for you after death. So therefore, this is truly keeping the oppressed within their positions, because they don't want to break out of those positions, because they don't want to jeopardize not having that eternal bliss as a result. Now, the second example is it makes a virtue out of suffering and oppression, as in the biblical quote that it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. Injustices during life will be rectified in the afterlife. Therefore, there is no need during life to try overthrow or overcome this injustice right now. So it's making that poverty more tolerable as a result. So really saying to the bourgeoisie, hang on here, you will not get your time. You will not be in the kingdom of heaven, in the view of the proletariat. Now, the proletariat will believe that the bourgeoisie will not be getting to heaven because they've not endured the same suffering and oppression and misfortune in which they've suffered, which makes them seemingly more willing or desirable or more deserving for them to actually belong and get into heaven. Now, the third way in which religion is used to remain as that opium of the masses, it offers hope of the supernatural intervention to end suffering. For example, Jehovah's Witnesses believe that Judgment Day will arrive and those who are not religious will be judged and punished. So it's making this anticipation of the future a little bit more acceptable because that they believe that there'll be some form of supernatural intervention which will then obviously help them and relieve that oppression in which they have suffered. Now, obviously, that is a true way of ensuring that, okay, only the people who are deserving will receive the help of these supernatural beings. Now, religion often justifies the social order and away a person's position within it. In this way, social arrangements appear inevitable, and those at the bottom can accept and come to terms with their situation. In the same way, poverty and misfortune can be seen as punishment for sin. So, possibly, they might argue because it's something that you've done within a past life, that is why you are suffering for poverty. So it's all about that past life that you have done. That is why in your new life you have experienced that poverty and that suffering as a result. Now, obviously, we know that technically, if we were looking at it in terms of Marxism, this might not necessarily be the case. It might be the fact that it's sheer understanding that it is the bourgeoisie dominant ideology and their control of the superstructure that is ensuring that this hierarchy is maintained and that they remain at the bottom, and this is done through their manipulation of religious texts. Now, this is just an example for you, really, on how you can see how religious texts may be used to keep the masses as submissive and subservient to the dominant ideology of the bourgeoisie. Now, if we just look at this one line that I've circled, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Now, this is saying that, yes, you might not be overly strong and that you might be quite weak. However, despite those who dominate you and override you, you will inherit the earth over them one day because you are the chosen one. Next time, blessed are they who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure of heart, for they shall see God. Now, if you are not any of these desirable characteristics, then you will not see God. This is purely identified in terms of a Marxist point of view as a piece of scripture that is really confirming that bourgeoisie ideology. It's saying, okay, you might be weak, you might be meek, you might not be fully satisfied as an individual, but you wait, you keep calm, and then when it's time for you to go to the next life, you will be rewarded. Instead of those punishments that you've had for your past lives, they will be forgotten because you will move on to bigger and better things in your next life because you've been subservient and you've followed the rules, which has been laid out by the religious scripture, such as what we can see within the Beatitudes here. Therefore, religion justifies and legitimates the existing social order. So, through the use of that scripture, really, we can see that this is the example in terms of medieval Europe. With kings and queens ruled by divine right, they got their legitimacy from God. So, therefore, they are the chosen ones because it's a God given right. Whilst really, it is your God given right as the proletariat to suffer this oppression, this poverty, and you are there, therefore ready to accept it, like the kings and queens have readily accepted due to their God-given right that has been preordained to them. Now, individuals were persuaded to accept their situation as it was divinely ordained and therefore something they should not challenge. It is not something which you should challenge or want to change because God does not make mistakes seemingly. However, it might just be the bourgeoisie ensuring that they stay in power, whilst the proletariat, they ensure that they keep them under, so that they don't try to create any type of revolution, especially with the idea that it's ordained and therefore it should not be challenged. Now, Marx saw religion as a form of alienation. So humans invent an alien being, which is God, which they believe to be all powerful and to have control over them and their environments. So obviously to ensure that, okay, if something bad happens, it was God's will. In doing so, they give up their true humanity by denying themselves the right to make their own decisions. So they are giving up their free will and what makes them human to try and ensure and give the power to another person, such as the supernatural being that will then dictate and control their lives as a result. Now, Marx also saw religion as a mechanism of social control. It creates false class consciousness, mistaken beliefs about the true nature of the social life, which justify the position of the ruling class. This prevents the working class developing class consciousness, in which they become aware that they are being exploited and oppressed, and unite together to overthrow the capitalist system that exploits them. So really, this is ensuring that the bourgeoisie dominant ideology has continued. So by creating this false class consciousness, where they're not actually aware of what is truly going on around them, the bourgeoisie can still really flourish and develop as a community, as a subgroup, whilst the proletariat will still remain there, funding and processing and providing structural support to that superstructure that the bourgeoisie control. And obviously, the proletariat will also be contributing economically to that superstructure through their contributions through maybe religious payments, etc. So therefore, religion will continue to act as a conservative force according to Marx's points here, because the proletariat will not challenge the bourgeoisie's dominant ideology, and they will just continue to accept the oppression in which they are feeling. Now, Marx believed with the advent of communism, religion would no longer be necessary, since the means of production would be communally owned by the members of society, and no individuals would own this wealth and the power, and there would be no social classes, because there would be no hierarchy in place within a communist society. So therefore, without classes, there would be no need for religion, as its sole purpose was to legitimate ruling class power. Religion would therefore disappear as a result, because there is no need for that social structure to be in place, because everyone is on an equal keel. Therefore, no sole person is in charge of any other. Therefore, because there would be no need for religion, the idea of alienation would also disappear, because there would no longer be that imaginary supernatural being controlling their lives. Instead, individuals be in control of it themselves, which is the main true reason as to why we really should develop this argument further. However, the idea that religion would disappear underneath communist regimes is not necessarily always true. Because, as we see, communist countries such as Cuba now accept that religion will coexist with communism and they will no longer attempt to suppress it. So maybe Marx got it wrong. Maybe that actually religion can flourish and can actually coexist within a communist state, even with everything being communally owned. Without the hierarchy being in place. So maybe alienation and the social control that religion exerts may have a different function than what Marx thinks in terms of class oppression. So within the Soviet Union underneath communist leadership in 1917 to 1990, the state constantly opposed the existence of religious beliefs and destroyed many Russian Orthodox churches as well as mosques and synagogues. Whilst within Russia right now, we can see that there is a huge number of Russian Orthodoxes now. Now, the main reason why Marx would argue here is because the capitalist system has infiltrated the Russian Union, which has then created this individual drive to find and quest for this knowledge, which actually is created and manipulated by the bourgeoisie, the individuals that are controlling the production of power within the Russian Union. So, underneath the communist leadership, there was no religious beliefs because the state fought against it. Whilst now within the new seemingly capitalist society, it is now being impacted by the massive increase of Russian Orthodox followers in Russia. Now, here is some evidence to support the Marxist view of religion. So if we're going to look at bit by bit here. Now we've got slavery. So in the description part here, we've got enslaved societies, e.g. sugar plantations in the West Indies, slave masters tried to convert African slaves to European religions. How does it support Marxist views? Slave masters saw religion as a way of controlling their slaves, preventing rebellion by giving the masters control over the slaves' beliefs, which then obviously prevented the slaves potentially creating some form of change. So religion remained as that opium, numbing that pain in which the slaves were feeling seemingly. Now, the Hindu caste system. So, in the traditional Hindu caste system in India, which is now illegal, people were divided into 5 castes based upon their supposed degree of religious purity. So they had the Brahmins, which was seemingly the priests, which were at the top, and then you had the untouchables, the unskilled labourers at the bottom. And obviously you would be associated and put into one of these categories, and then that would determine where you really got in life. Now, since no movement was permitted between the castes, this system ensured the ruling class maintained their power and control and justified the lowly positions of those at the bottom in terms of their religious impurity. So really, if you were wanted to be at the top of that caste system in your next life, you have to ensure that you remain pure within this life. Now we have the New Christian Right, which is a very religious Christians in the United States with highly conservative and pro-capitalist views. E.g., George W. Bush was actually a member of the New Christian Right. Now, how does this support Marx's view? The New Christian Right justify free market capitalism, which supports the interests of the bourgeoisie in religious terms, thereby legitimating ruling class power, which is also providing individuals with the sense of alienation and allowing the bourgeoisie to exert that social control even further over the proletariat. Next one we've got is the evangelical Christianity in Latin America. So the New Christian Right have encouraged the spread of Protestant religious beliefs in predominantly Catholic Latin American countries, particularly amongst the poor in shanty towns. So really to try legitimate the position in which those individuals are in those shanty towns, to ensure that they don't try to rebel or go any further beyond those means. Now, how does this support the Marxist view? Protestant religious beliefs provide religious discipline and hope of salvation in the afterlife to some of the poorest in Latin America societies, discourage them from supporting radical Catholic liberation theology and encouraging support for the US-style capitalist values. So really trying to keep those individuals from trying to create a social change in which we know liberation theology could implement. Now, as we know, Marx and Engels had a very close relationship. So seemingly what we should be expecting in Engels' work is that there should be a little bit of similarity in what he is stating about religion. Now, he recognised religion was not always a conservative force that serves the best interest of the bourgeoisie. So he's starting to recognise the idea that maybe, religion in terms of the Catholic liberation theology could be a revolutionary force. Now, religion usually started off with the oppressed groups as a way of coping with the oppression, so really being confirmed through the use of the Beatitudes, so religious scripture, and he states that religion could become a force of change, uniting the oppressed groups with values which will then provide the basis for future actions. So really uniting that group, providing that social solidarity. These views will be discussed more, and it's helped to provide the basis of neo-Marxism, which will be the next video on from this one. Now, the criticisms of Marxism. So we go straight with the functionist view here. So Marxism ignores the positive benefits of religion to society, such as the way it creates stability and shared values, which are necessary for society to function effectively. Religion benefits everyone, not just the ruling class, which actually, if we are looking at the functionist perspective, they have hit the nail on the head. Religion does provide that social solidarity, which Marxism fails to recognise. And it provides that value consensus, again, which Marxism fails to recognise. So maybe we need to stop being so negative and accept some of the positive sides that the function of religion has in society. Now, some further criticisms here. So, religion under communism. So, attempts to destroy religion in communist countries were not successful, and religion survived in the USSR, and Catholicism thrived in communist Poland. So, quite possibly, the idea that religion is a construct of the capitalist society may be wholly unfounded. Whilst another issue that will be creeping in is the issue of secularization. So religion seems to have declined in many Western societies, suggesting it is no longer needed to maintain ruling class power. Potentially as a sideline, the bourgeoisie could be using other parts of their superstructure to really enforce that ideology. And religion now, as a outdated source, has fallen by the wayside, and they've not really tried to maintain that point of view. Another criticism here is the narrow focus of Marxism. By concentrating on just one possible role of religion in society, it ignores the much broader range of effects religion might have. So again, really ignoring that actually religion could have some positive side effects, while focusing down on the oppressive forces. What about more of the fundamentalist forces that can exist within religious societies? Feminist criticisms and religion acts to preserve male patriarchal power and not ruling class power. Marxists ignored gender and equality when analysing the use of religion in society. So we're going to ignore the fact that actually, most of the power brokers in religious organisations are men, and they control the ideology in which women interact with when they go to worship. So Marx really needs to revise his theory and maybe withdraw away from just the class focus and incorporate gender and the idea of inequality within this. Now, I cannot emphasize enough here, Marx sees religion as a conservative force. So it's a force by which is not going to be used to create a social change or movement. Whilst now a criticism that arises, religion can be seen as a radical force. As we know, Engels stated earlier, it has got that ability to do so. So religion does not always support the status quo, so the mainstream ideas, and the preservation of ruling class power. Some radical religions, such as liberation theology, challenge ruling class power. Now, liberation theology was a radical movement that grew up in South America and said the church should act to bring about social change, should ally themselves with the working class to do so. And this then created a buzz within those communities and created a change within the Latin American communities such as El Salvador and Nicaragua, which meant that actually the working class then became free of the opium, free of the chains that the bourgeoisie have constructed around the poor proletariat. Now, there are many examples to support this idea in terms of Marxism. There are many examples from religious where ruling groups have used religious doctrine to justify their dominance. So the caste system in traditional India justified the Hindu belief system, as well as in Europe, the kings and queens said it was divine rights. Now, Bruce in 1988 points out that the conservative Protestants in the USA, the New Christian Right, consistently support right-wing political candidates. Although they have a limited influence in American politics, they have tended to defend the interests of the rich and powerful at the expense of other groups in the population. As well as these candidates, they will have a lot of money funded towards them throughout their political campaigns in the US, which therefore means they may consistently be re-elected as a result. So really focusing down on this, that these political candidates will then influence the policy that is being put out into the US, which means that they may try to stick it as close as possible to that religious doctrine so that they can ensure that the mainstream bourgeoisie dominant ideology is continued as a result. Now, George W. Bush here was president from 2001 to 2009, consistently supported right-wing views, for example, low taxes for the rich, and was a supporter of the new Christian right. So he would have provided and would have been pro-capitalist, which for Marx would have meant that he would have liked that religion being maintained in society to ensure the dominance of the proletariat and keeping them within their oppressive states. Now, summary here. Now, Marxism is a conflict perspective that highlights the ideological functions of a religion. Marxists see religion as dulling the pain of class exploitation and as fostering false class consciousness. They see religion as a form of ideology and as a response to alienation. For Marxists, religion therefore legitimates social inequalities, disguises the true nature of exploitation, and keeps the workers passive and resigned to their fate. So the proletariat, in a sense, have nothing to fear but their chains, which the bourgeoisie have created for them to ensure that they remain oppressed and alienated, and that the bourgeoisie continue to have that social control as a result. Now, that is it for Marxism. If you have any further questions, let me know.